Hey guys, how are you? Another installation of Irvine sermons here for you. Today we'll be talking about Chapter 9, Section 3, which is ultimately going to mean the end of Washington's 2 terms as president, and we have our very first election for a new president since Washington. So it's not an intensely long section. There's not a whole lot to go through here, but it is definitely going to be an important section for you to understand before we hit Section 4, which is just jam-packed with goodies. So without any further ado, I'm trying to keep this short so I don't lose you guys, so I'll jump right into it. This is, again, Chapter 9, Section 3. Ultimately, what we're seeing is that politics has begun in America. We get through George Washington, who basically was a unanimously elected president, and now, thanks to his choices in cabinet, we have very different political opinions brewing in this country. You had the Federalists versus the Democratic Republicans, or if you remember, we also called them the Anti-Federalists in the very beginning, but ultimately that is where these parties come from. Within the Federalist Party, you had individuals like Hamilton and Adams, and I would say that Washington probably would have been a Federalist as well. The Federalist Party supported manufacturing, banking, big money, finance. They disliked the poor and uneducated having a voice. They thought that folks like you and I, because we didn't have the proper education, because we didn't necessarily know the candidates, we really shouldn't be voting anyway. They also thought that the federal power should rule. The federal power, meaning the federal government over the states. Federal power was the big dog, and they should have all the say. Interestingly enough, though, they also believed in a very loose interpretation of the Constitution of the United States. They said it was just basically a guideline. It wasn't, concrete. And they preferred that we remain allies with Britain. They saw more opportunities in trade with Britain and aligning ourselves with Britain than, say, France. Now you jump to the other side of the political aisle and you run into the Democratic Republicans. The Democratic Republicans were Thomas Jefferson and Madison. They supported farmers and agrarian culture. They disliked the wealthy ruling everything. They saw money equaling power, and they said that that was a dangerous thing. They also thought that the states should hold more power than the federal government. The states were here before the federal government, and that the states ultimately should have more say. They also believed in a very strict interpretation of the Constitution. If it doesn't say that you can do it, then you can't do it. And lastly, they probably preferred to remain loyal with France. France was our very first ally. If you remember, they came to help us win our independence from Britain, and they said we owed our loyalty to them. Okay. So let's get right into it. Ultimately, what you see on the Democratic-Republican side is going to be Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr. Aaron Burr was from New York. Jefferson was from Virginia. So you have both the North and the South on the Democratic-Republican ticket. Jefferson had gone to Burr, who was a rising star in the political scene. He also met with then-Governor George Clinton of New York to try to figure out a way to defeat Adams in the election. Ironically, I will throw in here that Burr is the man that will kill Alexander Hamilton in just a few years from now. But ultimately, I want you guys to begin to see how this is evolving. 2 Democratic Republicans taking on Adams and a gentleman by the name of Pinckney. We'll get into that here in just a minute. Look, ultimately, I also think that it's worth pointing out to you guys that Colonial Newspapers began picking sides between the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans at this time. This is not new. If you guys are watching the media, you're hearing elected leaders say things like fake news. We have discussed this at length in class. Fake news is just that. It is news that is fake. We have to be careful and distinguish, though, the difference between fake news and bias news. Even way back in colonial times, newspapers were picking sides, so this is not anything new. Anyone running for political office probably wasn't fond of some of the stories that were being published about them, but that is one of those ideas, freedom of the press. So just wanted to point that out to you. So ultimately, after 2 terms as president, Washington bids farewell to the role and returns to his home in Virginia to once again become a planter. Little does he know that he will be dead in less than 5 years after leaving office. It is very unfortunate, this man giving so much of his personal life to this country, dedicating so much time, ultimately leaving the office and only having 5 years of time as a private citizen to enjoy it. So, setting up the election of 1796, once again, the Federalists up here. You have Adams from Massachusetts, Pinckney from South Carolina, you have Jefferson from Virginia, you have Burr from New York. Federalists, Democratic Republicans. Okay? And look, the results are pretty much split right down the middle. This election goes on, and Adams does wind up winning the majority of the vote. So it is clear that Adams is going to be the next president. However, there's this curveball that kind of comes out of nowhere. Nobody sees it coming. Everyone had assumed that the way that it's going to work, the Electoral College would cast one vote for who they wanted as president and one vote for who they wanted as vice president. But that's not really clear. What winds up happening in the Electoral College is the Electoral College casts their two votes, and they are split down the middle. They're casting votes for who they think should be president, and what we wind up seeing is Adams gets 71 electoral votes and Jefferson gets 68. Listen, that's not a big deal. Ultimately, today, if there is a president of the United States who wins by a margin of 3 votes, as long as they've reached that magic number, they become president. What was different back then is the rules stated whoever wins the election becomes president, and whoever comes in second becomes vice president. So Adams is forced to take Jefferson as his vice president. Wow. Think of that. Let that sink in for just a minute. Can you imagine these two sharing the Oval Office? Try to imagine the White House with President Trump and Vice President Clinton. This is exactly what occurs in the election of 1796. The rules stated that the winner became president and the runner-up became vice president. Everyone assumed that the vote would go different ways, but it doesn't really matter. This is exactly how it turned out. And your White House looks like this. You have Adams, a Federalist, as president, and you have Thomas Jefferson, a Democratic Republican, as vice president. Folks, these are going to be a really interesting 4 years. So, look, like I said, not all the content. We're just over 8 minutes. I'm going to shut my yap and let you guys just sort of, digest what I just fed to you. Look for Section 4 to be coming soon because it is a doozy. There is a lot of great stuff coming out of Section 4. The stage has been set, so hold on tight. As always, if you guys have any questions, problems, concerns, you know what to do. Send me an email, reach out to me in chat on Teams, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care.